Warning, I'm going to be swearing in this review. I'm not going to say if you're a minor don't watch this since I'm 15 years old, but if you're under the age of 13, I would discourage you from watching this because you're not old enough to hear the swearing I'm going to do. I know that it's annoying to hear you're not old enough, but your brain develops over time. Your brain hasn't yet developed to know when it is appropriate to use these words and when not to. I wish nowadays that I had never heard swearing in my early youth because I was not mature enough to use the words properly or even reserve their use entirely. The purpose of swearing is like seasoning. If you use too much of it, the end result becomes so overflavored that people want nothing to do with you. So at the very least, if you're 8 years old, don't use these words in public, and especially not at your home. So with that out of the way, I really hate this fucking movie because there was potential in the plot. It's been a year since this movie has been released, so I'm not going to censor spoilers. But if you're interested in this film, you probably have already seen it, or at least seen somebody else's review, one which almost certainly was glowingly positive because Western civilization seems to love sucking off Walt Disney. Let me get this out of the way first so that it's not, so that I don't have to bring it up later. I do not like the company. If you have read my website, you would know that I consider it in the top 50 worst things on Earth. Although some entries on this list are less serious than others, the Walt Disney Company is one that I really do believe deserves to be on that list. They abuse their power to get more money, to the detriment of basically everyone else. They're like the Electronic Arts of animated film. However, this isn't the point of this video, and I will talk about it in a later video. So, everyone out who wants to see ZOOTOPIA first, let the review commence, gentlemen. I'll be using a hit point system similar to the mysterious Mr. Enter's My Little Pony reviews, with 10 at first instead of 5, and without a point limit, positive or negative. Part 1. The fucking forgettable story and how it was marketed. This film claims to be a story about racism. It's not. What it is a generic feel-good, maybe we'll live forever Disney film, just like all of the ones the company has ever released. I'll have to take a point off here already for creative sterility. I hate this plot and wish that one day there would be an ending where the hero gets their fair punishment. But because this is a Disney movie, there's a better chance that Captain Ed Smith lives longer than the Earth does. This film starts off with a play. It's not that good. It's basically saying This film starts off with a play. It's not that good. It's basically saying it's so not yesterday. It explains absolutely nothing about the world past we're intelligent now. It's completely pointless too, since we already know that animals have become intelligent ever since the trailers have come out. It's the whole point of the film. -1 point totally. I'm going to put the rest of this scene on the screen in text form while I talk about the overall plot. This is where I think the movie was most disappointing. The plot, the most fundamental part of a film. Firstly, it's by the numbers. Stop me if you've heard this one before. The main character, as a child, has a lofty ambition. XTX years later, they come to realize the ambition, but as repercussions nobody inside the plot could have seen coming. Yeah, I can name at least 4 films off the top of my head that fulfills that plot. This film, Up, The Princess and the Frog, and Toy Story 3, sort of. I'm sure that there's more. Yeah, I know having a happy ending gets more money, but it shouldn't be about that. Fucking hell, Mr. Disney himself said, I don't make movies to make money, I make money to make movies. Maybe if you followed that philosophy, you might have a good lineup of films, not 40 straight-to-video sequels. Secondly, if you wanted to make it about racism, how about, making the main character, racist? Make them learn their lesson over the plot of the film, befriend the black guy, and then when they've inevitably screwed up, have them punished for their actions. For the specific one, I'd say that losing her job and having Mr. Wild hate her is fair. And thirdly, make sure that it doesn't take place in the 2010s, one of the most socially leftist times in history after the late 1960s and 1970s. If you want a story about racism, make it take place any time else, like 1864 or 1948. It really isn't hard. I can do better, and I'm a fan fiction writer, the most talentless and creatively sterile position in the whole of the writing spectrum. Because Fox establishment, I declare every scene involving modern technology null and void, and the movie now takes place in pre-speech America. Speech is in the I Have a Dream speech from 1963. And lastly, why is Mr. Wilde heterosexual? Actually, I know why, but you're already tackling racism, ahem, and I really don't need to see the romance plot between Mr. Wilde and Miss Hobbs. I've seen it before. In every film ever made with a male and female lead character. There is nothing new you could possibly do to make a love plot interesting. The most interesting thing nowadays would be not to have one. Make the characters more interested in their mission than each other. Is that so hard to ask? In fact, I think it might be easier because now you don't have to worry about writing love, which I've noticed many writers really struggling with. But hey, you gotta have love in there because what's an interesting? Still, don't write love. Or at least write it between a main character and a side character, like an NYPD Red by James Patterson. As a side note, I really love this book. You guys should read it. While I was talking about the film, Miss Hops has gone to police academy. Oh, how they grow up so fast. One minute they're being bullied, the next they're becoming police officers in order to return the favor. It's now 1957. Remember what I said a minute ago? And Miss Hops is on the top of her field in the police force's Mammal Inclusion Initiative, or something along those lines. Basically racial preference, but if it were for white people. As in, mammals already have these jobs, you stupid gits. The point of racial preference is to bias the job applications toward one or more races typically seen as oppressed or otherwise disadvantaged. And as a side point, it can be seen as incredibly condescending, as it's essentially saying that the person receiving help can't possibly make it into the job on their skill alone. And the music isn't to my taste either. I hate Shakira's music with a passion, and even then I feel like she deserved to not have to resort to being in Zootopia to try to regain her relevance. I might not be the best person to judge her popularity, but I don't hear anyone talking about her music anymore, really. She's kind of like Beyonce. If you talk about her to someone, they'll know who you're talking about, but they won't have heard anything past maybe a couple songs, past the most obvious ones. So I don't like the soundtrack to this film, but we should get back to the rest of the film, right? Soon enough, a few more years has passed, and it's 1960 or so. Miss Hops is 23 years old, and she is accepted into Zootopia, otherwise, and in this review, referred to as New York's police force. Her parents talk to her about the larger animals that eat meat, and we as the audience are supposed to see this as somehow being unjustifiably racist, even though second graders know that foxes and rabbits don't mix. She's accepted as a meter maid, though, which Miss Hops does not like. Personally, while people see sexist or racist connotations in this, I see logical ones. The other departments of police work, where Miss Hops' talents wouldn't be wasted, usually are on location and highly physical, and Miss Hops is a rabbit in a world where bison exist. The size difference between Miss Hops and Chief Bogo, who, by the way, may I mention is a mammal, alone should be enough to explain why she's best as a meter maid. You can only do so much for the soft bodies of rabbits versus the harder or at least larger ones of bison, cattle, foxes, and bears. If it were the military, then it might have made sense to see prejudicial overtones, but this is the police, where unit survival is at least somewhat important, especially the best student in the whole class of 1957. Ms. Hops becomes the best meter maid in New York and expects to be kicked up to missing persons. Guess what, Ms. Hops? That won't work, because the skills involved in being a meter maid, operating the meters, writing quickly and well, etc., don't really apply to the missing persons cases. On one day of work, she meets Mr. Nick Wilde, the criminal fox. Basically, imagine a cunning black con artist, because that is exactly what Mr. Nick Wilde is. A black criminal. She tries to talk to him. We learn his age and a bit about him that has no bearing on the plot whatsoever, and something that does. He's a criminal. You heard it here first, folks. Black people just want to con you out of your money. But still, she bothers the chief enough to get a temporary promotion to missing persons on the condition that she hand in her badge if she doesn't get it done in 2 days. Personally, this shatters my suspension of disbelief. Not only do missing persons cases often last for weeks, but this seems like it shouldn't be legally allowed. What I see is Disney forcing in unfair treatment to make the main character sympathetic. You don't need this, though, and it just feels forced, because it is. It just makes the chief poorly written, at least as far as I know. Remember that I don't have any police background or relatives. Still, it seems more likely that either the chief would say, "You've got one chance, fuck up and you're toast here," or, "No, Miss Hops, you haven't proved yourself yet." It's just there to give the police a bad name. I'm sure that's not what they intended, but that's what happened, and I'm sure that it feels great to watch this in the police force. She goes over to Mr. Wilde for some reason that only God knows, Actually, it's to make sure he's a member of the plot, but because the writer isn't talented enough to actually put him in naturally. They say he's implicated in his disappearance, but he sells popsicles. He's not gonna be the kind of criminal that goes around killing people. Also, I just remember that Officer Klauhausen is the most fucking infuriating character in this entire goddamn thing. Take off 5 points. He is, without exaggeration, even worse than later joke characters. He is the worst, not just character, but a part of this entire fucking film. I've got a feeling that he was the writer's way of implying homosexuality, too. Anyway, she echoes an old joke that you could see done way better in the Looney Tunes short A Day at the Zoo from 1939. Even then, it's the best joke in the film, and it's soon followed by the worst. But before that, a mediocre joke I didn't find funny. The yak has a photographic memory, and the elephant doesn't. Har har har. They go to the New York Department of Motor Vehicles, and to a funny joke. The Department of Motor Vehicle workers are sloths. Well, it would have been funny if it had been cut off of the... Well, it would have been funny if it would have been cut off after the first 5 or 10 seconds. Sure, you can claim anti-humor, but this is a Disney movie. It's for babies and furries. And the intended audience doesn't have the mental capability to understand anti-humor, let alone find it funny, and nobody who actually wanted to watch this movie would have had experience with the DMV, so what you've really done is board an entire piss-smelling theater. Good God, this scene goes on for 4 minutes, and I just want it to be over, and now I'm gonna kill myself if it doesn't end soon. The joke doesn't even work with context. You would think that a place with notoriously long lines would maybe hire somebody that isn't from a species that's notorious for being slow, and they've all learned it too. Which tells me that species does play a large part in ability, making Boyo's decision at the beginning even more justified. Eventually, and I really do mean eventually, the joke ends, and they track the play to Tundra Town. Tundra Town is a cold Brighton beach. There's wolves, bears, and organized crime, and everyone's Russian. And speaking of, the second worst joke in the film. This is Mr. Big, because I've never seen this joke in any other film. No siree, not at all. No, Bob, there isn't a TV tropes page for this exact character throughout time and media. Point remove. I mean, you're the Walt Disney Company. As much as I despise you, I can respect that you do have at least a couple of creative people on your staff. Can I at least expect the littlest inkling of thought into this theatrically released film? His daughter is an even worse name, but at least she isn't a stereotype, sort of. At the very least, she had a couple minutes worth of wiki-walking, starting from the bratty daughter trope. She is Mr. Big's motivation. While I absolutely loathe the fact that Mr. Big exists, I can't blame him for existing the way he does, and I actually don't mind him as a character. Conceptually, he should have been aborted. The original crime lord was Kozlov, a bear whose main motivation was his son Morris, and would have been nearly exactly the same in character, just not, the worst and the most overdone joke in mafia history, Italian, Russian, or Irish. They say that the Arctic Shrew was the sort of animal they wanted because it was vicious. But in this universe, people have, or at least are implied to have, distinct personalities. So species can play a role in temperament, but doesn't that conflict with the lesson you people wanted to teach with the "don't be a prejudicial asshole" branding the film has? What this means is that since the Arctic shrews are the most vicious animals you could find in the Arctic, it's perfectly a-okay to not trust them since they're likely to be crime lords. Be criminals. Only Mr. fucking Big is the Brighton Beach crime lord. By the way, his last name doesn't even make any sense in universe or out. Last names are meant to be descriptive. David Brown had brown hair, Alexander Smith worked in an ironsmith, Peter Anderson was Andrew's son, and Maximilian Moore lived near a moor, or heath. I can't believe that somewhere from 1400 to 1905 there was interbreeding either, because not only is Mr. Big a pure Arctic shrew, but that's not how sex works at all. Even if we can get past the tearing that would ensue, even if we can get past the tearing that would ensue from a larger animal like a bear trying to mate with a shrew, their genetics are far enough away that the number of chromosomes they have are completely different and do different things. There is no way Mr. Big can get this name, so from now on he is Mr. Small. Also, keep in mind that even though I've been talking about racist undertones in the film has at this point indeed completely forgotten it since Mr. Wilde's introduction scene, and doesn't remember that it tries to tackle this subject for another half an hour, or maybe even more. I have not watched this film since August. My memory will inevitably be off, but not by that much. So they go to the jungle neighborhood that unfortunately doesn't have an analog I can call it instead, so I'll just call it the place with all the trees. The place with all the trees is supposed to echo the first scene. It's here that they get their first clue. When the panther, then the panther loses his shit and almost kills them before falling to his death, but not before they call for backup. Backup comes too late and thinks that Hops is wasting their time when she tells them. Despite there being no motive for it, she doesn't gain anything from telling the others that the panther went feral. I don't shower very often, usually only when I think about it, and that happens every 3 days. I don't do a crazy level of exercise, though, 200 jumping jacks every other day, so it's not that big of a deal. I don't think that it's essential when there aren't that many bacteria cultivating on me that I would need to shower to remove. So believe me when I say that I want to shower after saying that word. But the guy talked about night howlers, which Mr. Wilde and Miss Hops interpret as wolves. It makes sense for them to think of wolves since the guy used slang that is almost certainly inspired by wolves, since wolves howl at night. So they drive back to Brighton Beach, and surprise, surprise, there's a giant fucking research base that they didn't think to search beforehand or even see, I guess. I guess Brighton Beach is just that big, or maybe they were caught in a blizzard. Either way, they're here now, and surprise, surprise, so is everyone else, including Mayor Lionheart acting super suspicious and talking about testing on these people. Now, freshmen to this film, look me in the eye and tell me if you believe Mayor Lionheart is the villain. Raise your hand, leave a like, whatever. Notice that the like bar is still at like 1, even 2 years after I've released this video. Yes, I'm confident in this prediction. If Disney wants us to fall for the surprise villain, maybe they shouldn't have a surprise villain in every one of their films, because you cannot have a surprise that you have seen before. It's why people aren't shocked that automobiles are faster than walking. It's because our brains have had time to wire themselves so fast that everyday stimuli don't freak us out every time, so that it can focus energy on the important, new, and surprising things. A good overt villain is always going to be better than a mediocre covert villain, and nowadays everyone knows to expect covert villains. It's worthless as a twist. Oh, what a twist is justified in this case. You should never allow the audience to say what a twist. It proves that your attempts to make a compelling story have failed. So, Miss Hops uses the technology that wasn't invented yet to record her findings. Mayor Lionheart catches on to her, but she and Mr. Wilde get away through the sewer system and out to a waterfall. I guess this would be the Hudson River. Sewage flows into it, and the movie isn't a perfect analog, so I guess it sort of works. So they swim all the way from Brighton Beach to Manhattan through the sewage-filled Hudson River. Or I don't know, to Gravesend, then they rest a little to dry off before taking a taxi to Manhattan. Also, wouldn't they die of hypothermia if they plunged into the Hudson River and swam during a blizzard? It's never explained how they survived swimming in unheated water outside during a snowstorm, but hey, why would doing that have any negative repercussions, like, say, death? Hey kiddies, swim in the Hudson in the middle of January. It'll be fun. Although if they actually did, I suppose that would mean fewer children, so I guess it's the only time that this film has given the audience good advice. So yeah, they make their way back to Manhattan and reveal what they saw about Lionheart, getting him sacked and letting Miss Dawn Bellwether take the position of mayor and planting the seeds of a race war. But before that happens, we get the resolution of the racism plot. Only what, an hour, give or take 30 minutes after the last mention of it in the film? Turns out, Mr. Wilde is a criminal because boo-hoo, he got teased a little bit in his Boy Scout troop. I will admit that the harness is a bit much, but if you expected anything more than initiation hazing from the sort of mob douche mentality you can expect of college or university brotherhoods, then you're a precious little innocent child. Somehow I feel like he never went to university. Oh, and guess what? She doesn't actually get punished in the end. Let me repeat that for you. She doesn't get punished for nearly starting a race war. Judy, I mean. There is no permanent repercussion Miss Hops has for affecting the lives of, if the signs are to be believed, tens or hundreds of billions of people. This is like if Thomas Midgley Jr. lived an uneventful life in a good home after introducing leaded gasoline, albeit after growing distant from a good friend for a couple of weeks. She doesn't do the smart thing and say, while there are no herbivore subjects, we don't know a lot about how this strange thing works. There's not enough evidence to draw firm conclusions yet. Please don't start a race war and blame me, thanks. No, she basically says predators, read black people, are going savage and killing a bunch of other people. Be afraid. And screws up her relationship with Nick Wilde because of it. Like she should. But even if I didn't spoil that But even if I didn't spoil that she and he get back together, you know that it would happen. Blind and deaf people who don't even know that this film exists know that it would happen. The Room knew that it would happen. Whatever. She drives back to bumfuck Arkansas, and we get to the point where the film ends. Miss Hops would be where the film should have ended, I mean. Miss Hops would be punished for her actions, and the race war would be weaker. Unfortunately, it doesn't go that way. XD days later, she's working as a carrot farmer like her parents, but she just isn't happy. She hears from her old school bully, Gideon Gray, that there is a repellent plant named in vulgar speech Night Howler. So she drives back to New York to become a vigilante and finds Mr. Wilde, trading in her clean criminal record, creating connections to criminals, causing hundreds of thousands of dollars in property damage to both public and private entities, and ensuring that she never works in the force again. I'm just kidding about that last part. She gets the job back the minute this part of the film is over. She finds Mr. Wilde. She finds Mr. Wilde and they steal a rail car that apparently wasn't being used on sections of somehow empty commuter rail track. Like, seriously, this is the most populated city in the United States. In 1960, in the real world, there were 7.8 million people, and in 2010 there were 8.2 million people. In the film universe, where a town of billions of people is bumfuck Arkansas, it could easily be in the hundreds of billions or trillions, and there's only one train on the tracks. In a city where most people don't have cars and instead takes taxis or trains. Somehow I feel like 10 or 20 would be a little bit more consistent with your universe and how your world's population works. But no, this oddly disused rail system has only one train on it, and otherwise the rail car is free to go at the speed of rail car per hour. That's 20 kph in the metric system. The rail car crashes into a wall and explodes. I can't remember if it was diesel or electric, but somehow I can believe this a little bit more if it were a diesel rail car. That, I guess, kills Mistress Pinkman and White, because fuck good television, am I right? And Mayor Bellwether, for some reason, is there and chases down Mr. Wilde and Miss Hops, and once she gets a clean shot on Mr. Wilde with... and chases down Mr. Wilde and Miss Hops, and gets a clean shot on Mr. Wilde with a Night Howler gun. Oh yeah, there's a Night Howler gun. Raise your hand or leave a like or comment if you genuinely think... that maybe Disney might take a risk and have Mr. Wilde go feral. Yeah, you people watching in 2020 can look down into the like and dislike bar and see that it's 1 to 691,337. The Night Howler gun was loaded with a blueberry, and Mr. Wilde pretends to be aggressive and animalistic, despite Miss Hops being the one established as an actor and not Mr. Wilde. If you wanted to establish Mr. Wilde as having acting talent, how about him, I don't know, lying well? He doesn't ever lie past lies by omission. Everything he says is true to the letter, but no further. So why can he act? Whatever. Little Miss Manson reveals her race war plot before being dragged off to prison. I guess that's not that unrealistic. Charles Manson actually killed people. Charles Manson had underlings to kill people trying to start the war. Miss Bellwether simply used mind-altering drugs. However, ours is a world with only a couple more than 5 billion people, and I can definitely tell you that if Manson did those things in 2013, which may I remind you is the canon year this film takes place in, he definitely would have been on death row, and the only reason he didn't is because he killed the Tates and LaBiancas in 1970. But whatever, I guess I accept this, since I say this film takes place circa 1960, which makes Little Miss Manson here the original. But Charles was way more hardcore, and I think he would have made a way more interesting villain than White Wolf here. White Wolf, I like that. He would have made the movie, I don't know, intense, actually suspenseful because the villain is dangerous. Anyway, the film ends with something that would never happen in any city, year, or universe. The known criminal and his vigilante friend, who both have connections to the Russian mafia, become officers of the law, and Miss Hops becomes Mrs. Officer Wilde. This film was bad. Part 2, my thoughts that weren't directly related to the plot. If you've heard the background of some of these characters, or have two brain cells to rub together for others, then you should be fucking insulted by the marketing. I'm not saying that I'm the second Albert Einstein, although I know of someone who is, but the anti-racism tale they promised is legitimately insulting to what little intelligence I have. The people who wrote this should be ashamed for themselves, being racist assholes, and the sheep being the villain at the end felt like it was tacked on, because somebody at the Disney Animation Studio that shot this film out remembered around 2015 that the tale was hyped up as being anti-racist, so they needed to show that evil can come from anyone. except they somehow overlooked every other problem with not only that premise, but the film as a whole. While I understand that the willing audience doesn't have enough brain power to actually be affected by this was dirty work. Imagine if this film were live action and had the power to resurrect actors. Casting young Elizabeth Sladen as Miss Hobbs, Henry Simmons as Mr. Wilde, and Helen Mirren as Bellwether. Wouldn't audiences not accept Henry Simmons as a jaded criminal without many redeeming qualities? And how about the films you fucking Schrodinger's racism plot? It might exist, it might not. Most of the time it doesn't. Most of the time it's a buddy cop film with a straight-laced white cop and the bad black cop. You could watch Lethal Weapon 2 and get a better experience all around. And for the heterosexual men and homosexual women, there's a sex scene between the main guy and this love interest, and they show tits on the screen. And what about that love plot, eh? There's no reason to be invested in a love plot where you know how it's going to end. Why watch a love story? Why wonder what's going to happen when you know exactly what's going to happen? In fact, that's the entirety of love plots, basically. That's why I don't like reading love in fiction. It's because I already know what's going to happen and it's not interesting. This film suffers from the exact same problem as the Avengers Age of Ultron. Money was the primary motivator in its creation. They couldn't do anything remotely scary, controversial, or dare I say, interesting, or else they won't get all the money from the widest market they can get. Babies, furries, and old people, because a couple thousand people might get offended. So because they couldn't bear the thought of not making all the money, their film ends up safe and forgettable and making fucking bank. Zootopia 2 has already been announced, and it's going to be about the nice married life of a criminal vigilante who almost started a race war and their freak of nature geneticist Bane child masquerading as a second buddy cop film. Is there a more boring topic they could have picked? And it's not even like it's a boring thing necessarily, married life, but knowing this film and knowing the Disney sequel track record, there's not much else it could be. And don't come to me saying, they said they might go either way, because that's a load of shit they just spoon-fed you so that you go see the film. Because if they just say one way or another, that means that a certain percentage of people won't go because their ship is ruined. And if they don't have every demographic going, then they can't make all of the money. And I legitimately don't get any person who doesn't see Mr. Wilde and Miss Hobbs' relationship at the end of the film. The only way it could be more obvious is if somebody had a picture of Mr. Wilde and Miss Hobbs doing each other. Well, guess what, my sheep? They won't get my money. In fact, if you want to save 2 hours of time in 2210, just wait 2 hours of time and $22.10. Just wait a couple weeks and you can easily find out what happens with Mr. Wilde and Miss Hobbs over the internet. Or if you want to save a couple of years, just trust me, it's going to happen. Mr. Wilde and Miss Hobbs get together, they get married, they have a child at the end of the film. And with all the little bunnies that will come from the woodwork to sit down for 2 hours, watch the movie, cry when it gets emotional, and not care that they're being played for a fool. If you want to see more Mr. Wilde and Miss Hobbs, there's a plethora of fanfiction on the internet that is more creatively written than anyone at Disney could do. Somehow. I had an idea in the shower that Mr. Wilde and Little Finnick should have been an ex-couple, but since they're good at conning one together, they stick together. Could have added drama, could have had one conflict that might have been taking a risk, and may have blocked out the cliche, boring as hell love story between Mr. Wilde and Miss Hobbs. But hey, your stockholder's a 64-year-old religious man, and you wanted to make sure that you didn't offend them in any way, huh, Disney? And why does the film feel like it needs jokes? In fact, why does the whole animation industry feel like animated films need to be at least partially comedies? Children don't need constant humor in order to be entertained, and in fact, it's getting old. One day, I want to see an animated film with a rating low enough for children to see it without a single joke. Animated films are, or should be, the same as any other medium of film. You don't see many jokes in the Dark Knight trilogy, do you? And this film shouldn't lend itself to many jokes either, because the story and places they go, not to mention the art style, isn't the right setup for any sort of comedy. Maybe a little bit of situation comedy, but that's all. And for the most part, they did this okay, but what jokes there were just so awful that it degrades the film. Please, animation industry, stop having so little respect for the medium you work in that you feel like you have to have comedy in your movies to get to any audience. Imagine if every film were a Three Stooges short. Sure, the Three Stooges are great, but if every film was copying them, it would get old really fast. The Day of the Doctor was good because it kept for the most part serious, and what little jokes there are character driven and don't actually detract from your enjoyment of the film, mainly because they're over in seconds. Illumination Entertainment, the disgusting excuses for humanity that brought us the Minions, released a rip-off film this year named Sing. It's about a pig who sings pop songs. So they managed to make something that I actively despise more than Minions and Norm of the North, and would rather have seen crash and take the whole company with them. I have no respect for anyone who works at Illumination Entertainment, and I don't care if they lose their jobs, because I feel the same way about Video Brinquedo now. Illumination Entertainment is a high street Video Brinquedo at this point, with animation somewhere between them and the people who made Rhapsody Street Kids. Have some respect for the medium you chose, will you? Part 3. Did I like a single element in this film? No. Okay, yes I did. The character designs were okay, the casting was fine, although if I were casting I would have had Judy be played by someone from the South, or maybe Kansas, since that's obviously where Bunny Barrow is based on. And she lived there for about 20 years, which is just about enough time to set an accent. The technical aspects are good and are held up to the Disney standard, and that's the one place where Disney shines. They do have talented people on board for visuals and audio. Unfortunately, almost none of them are creative. They can have some really, really good visuals and their audio doesn't ever have any technical problems, and their set design's also pretty okay. Although, if I can say one thing, I got triggered by the vacuum tube elevators, maybe because it reminds me of the B-movie. That's 2 little things I like to recommend this movie to anyone. Part 4. Conclusion. I hate this film. It did have a fantastic technical aspects though, so if I were to rate it out of 100, it would be a 31. In the end, it's not a horror film like After Last Season or Suicide Squad, but it was completely disappointingly predictable. I'm done talking about this film. I don't want to hear about it again. This video is nearly 6,000 words. I've said enough about this movie.